I'm Ed Mullins, and welcome to Inside Blue 360. With me is Maki Haberfeld, a legend in her own time, professor at John Jay University. Maki, good morning, welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. And I wish we were John Jay University. At this point, we are John Jay College. Maybe one day.
Good point. Maybe one day.
Maybe one day.
It's been growing, though.
It's been growing, but we're still one of the CUNY colleges, and I think we do have the capacity to stand on our own.
Is John Jay still the leader in criminal justice in the country? Am I correct?
John Jay is still the leader in criminal justice in the country, and I would say in the world.
Those are big shoes.
Big shoes, and again, that's what I'm saying. We do have the capacity to become a university.
One of the issues that we're going to talk about today is something that just appeared in a newspaper that occurred in Chicago, and it has to deal with ICE, immigration, issues of ICE detainees holding felons that are wanted by the ICE unit. What occurred just recently, February 19th in Chicago, there was an individual named Christopher Puente who lured a 3-year-old toddler into the bathroom of a fast food restaurant and sexually abused her. Back in June, ICE had filed a detainer with Cook County Sheriff's Office in Illinois to deport him. And in the state of Illinois, it's a sanctuary state, Chicago, sanctuary city, they allowed him to roam free. And now we have a 3-year-old child that was sexually assaulted. And this could be completely avoided. It shouldn't have had to happen. The elected officials are just as guilty as Christopher Puente. And what I find interesting is when you read the article, Chicago police say to respond back. The police had nothing to do with this, but they spin it to the police to put the blame on the police that they basically didn't cooperate. And this is a big problem. This is a problem that's occurring throughout the country. I mean, we have it in New York, California, it's all over. And how do we get these people to wake up?
Well, I think that the problem starts with this whole concept of sanctuary city. It was, if I'm not mistaken, it started in California. And it started in the 1980s. And I always ask when there is a new ordinance or a new law or some sort of a new policy that's been instituted, who are the people who looked at what's happening and who are the people who decided that this is the solution, right? How many police executives, how many criminologists, how many college professors who study crime causation and victimology, how many of those were consulted about the viability of sanctuary cities? What are the possible consequences when we are releasing convicted, not even convicted felons, people who were arrested for felonies, when we are releasing them back to the society? I bet you it was just the politicians who decided it's nice to be a sanctuary city. And again, as an immigrant myself, I empathize with the idea of creating safe environments for people who are in this country illegally, but came here for good reasons, came here to better themselves, their families. But at the same time, why do we need to have a double standard for people who came here illegally? And double standard meaning if somebody committed a felony, chances are that they're going to be in prison. It's a sexual felony in this. Somebody who is a sexual predator. But if somebody is here illegally, they'll be released to the community. It's just this double standard doesn't make sense, right?
Well, there's a difference, and I think the news media is playing a big role in this. That they're not explaining the difference between what ICE is doing. ICE is looking for felons. No. They're looking for people who've committed crimes who are illegal. They're not out looking for someone who is working in a job who's here illegal. They're looking for the criminal element who happens to be illegal. And these very same people live in their own communities, and they're victimizing their own people in many ways. And yet our elected officials are covering for them. And I think you're 100% correct. No one's ever come and asked us what we thought. This is done through Albany. We have a governor that just now passed the green light law, which has given everyone a driver's license. So, you want to get a driver's license, you got to bring in several forms of proof. But if I'm an illegal, I don't have to do that to get a driver's license. But we can both go to the airport, get on the same plane with a driver's license. We will know who you are, but we don't know who I am. And that's just stupid.
And this is exactly the double standard I'm talking about.
Right.
If you're a law-abiding citizen or a law-abiding immigrant, you treat it in one way, in a more punitive way, in a more strict way. If you're illegal here, if you have a criminal background and you're still illegal, you'll be treated in a much lenient way, which to me makes no sense whatsoever.
I think it was the district attorney in Virginia, when he ran for district attorney, he had put out written material that he would prosecute illegals at a lesser standard than he would citizens.
Nope.
So equal protection under the law does not exist in this individual DA's county. In New York City, we had a 92-year-old woman who was raped and murdered after ICE had filed a detainer.
A few weeks ago. Yeah.
And, unfortunately, we have Mayor de Blasio. We have a very open-leaning group of elected officials here. But how do you take, we have a 3-year-old and 92-year-old, both sexually assaulted, one murdered. Where's the accountability to the elected officials? Why are they not being held in some type of negligence for these policies that they were never voted on by the people? There's not a law that's been passed that said they can do this. They just selectively choose not to. And, where's the people complaining about this?
And again, I think there's some sort of misconception about the fact that, we elected you, so by default you are serving my interest, you're protecting my interest. But that's not the case. Politicians have their own agendas. And again, very rarely you see a politician who will say, okay, there is a problem. Let me bring people who are knowledgeable in how to solve this problem. People who are not necessarily my friends, my family, or people who are pressuring me to do something, but people who are, let's say, academics, like myself. Ask me, what my research of 3 decades shows about repeated offenders. I don't necessarily specialize in repeated offenders, but I'm a criminologist, so I know a little bit more than an average politician how repeated offenders behave. Psychology 101, the past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior, right? So if somebody committed a crime and you're releasing them on the streets, what are you expecting to happen? That by some sort of a miracle, they're going to become law-abiding, tax-paying citizens or residents of the city?
Well, that's their job. They get up, you get up, you go to school and you're a professor. I get up, I come to my job, I'm a police officer. If I am a criminal, that's my job. I go to bed at night, or I stay awake all night, sleep in the daytime, and go out to commit crimes. But we're now not even paying attention to that with the bail reform.
And it makes actually my job, and very much so about your job, almost irrelevant. So everything that I've been studying, everything that I've been writing about, it's not something to consider when you pass various policies, right? Because you know better than I do. So what does it say about looking at science, looking at best practices, looking at empirical research? You basically invalidate everything that I've been doing for decades by not considering and not asking me how I predict, everybody talks about predictive policing. Let's see at what happened before, what's happening today, let's predict for the future. Well,
except in this scenario, we disregard
yes, if I rape somebody, and maybe right now I am not caught in committing this crime, but the chances are that I'm going to rape again. It's not a one
You raise
crime.
an issue about predictive policing that, all of the people who are for predictive policing, well, this theory negates that practice.
100%.
So who's telling the truth?
100%. And again, it's not about the truth, it's about science versus politics, right?
Right.
And it's, if we bring it to what's happening today, just to take it to extreme, and why not, right? We have the coronavirus. Imagine if coronavirus would have been treated by a politician, or politicians for that matter, based on how they feel about it and ignore everything that the medical
Let's
doctors
not make a
are
big
saying.
deal out of it.
Yeah,
We'll just let people get
let's
sick
not
and
listen
die.
to medical doctors.
Right.
Let's just pass some sort of, law or some sort of,
It's okay to be
policy.
sick.
It's
Right.
okay. It's fine.
Right.
No worries.
That's a great example.
But policing and medical profession are frequently associated with people's lives, right? Policing, saving lives, saving lives of potential victims. Medical profession, same thing, saving lives of potential victims. So if we are relying on the doctors to do what needs to be done to save people from coronavirus, why are we not relying on criminologists and police?
Right.
To save the problem.
Do you think it's about
affected.
votes? Like, my feeling is it's always about getting the votes and playing to the loud, squeaky crowd rather than to the majority of the people. See, but I believe that the majority of the people are law-abiding people. They want safety. They want good communities. But most of those people are at work right now. Most of those people are going home, taking their children to sports and functioning in their lives. So they just begin to get immune to the nonsense that gets created by these elected officials. And I tend to think that those elected officials, sell these dumb policies for the purpose of votes.
Absolutely, but it goes back to Middle Ages and before this hue and cry, something is happening, let's do something about this. What did it serve? It served the purpose of the politicians back then in Middle Ages. Fast forward 600-700 years, we're doing the same thing. But the only issue is now that, back then in Middle Ages, people didn't know any better. I expect people to be more informed today and to say, okay, enough of this, enough passing of various resolutions, law, policies, without having an informed group of individuals, knowledgeable group of individuals saying, what are the consequences of this? It sounds great, we have a sanctuary city. Everybody wants to embrace the concept. And as I said before, me too. But again, not for everybody.
Right.
You committed a crime.
That's the difference.
You're going out.
Not for everybody.
You're going
That's
out.
the difference. People want to come to this country, and you can't blame them. They want to come here. There's millions of people lined up to come here. They're looking for better opportunity, looking for jobs, education, all those things, and you can't blame them for that. Unfortunately, our policies to get in are pretty, long-winded to make it difficult. But that doesn't mean that we should reward criminals to be here, to victimize innocent people, and in many, many cases, their own people. They live within their own immigrant communities.
Absolutely. I mean, this is something that also we know from research, that the victims of violent behavior usually live next to the perpetrators. They're the close ones.
It's the people you know.
People who embrace originality as individuals, they fall the victims to their predatory behaviors. So, again, I am not necessarily sure that the politicians or whatever is passed by the politicians serves the interest of the communities that they purport to protect. They say that they want to
I think
protect
they
them.
need to be held accountable.
But how would you hold them accountable? That's the problem.
I mean, well, what happens is some of these victims' families, they sue. And so the city will pay out, taxpayer money because the mayor put a policy in place that he can care less about. He's, moved on to another career, and this is just part of history as far as he's concerned. But you can't bring back a 92-year-old woman who was murdered.
No.
And it's unfair that a mayor is able to just walk away from it, because you and I couldn't walk away from it. We wouldn't be allowed to do that. No. District attorneys have immunity when they, do wrongful prosecutions. They have immunity. If we arrest the wrong person, we get sued. So it just doesn't, there's an imbalance there. And I think that needs to be looked at to some degree.
There's an imbalance, and there's also, I think, a lot of ignorance on, again, as I mentioned before, on the part of the general public, no matter how highly educated and sophisticated. There is this blind belief that whatever is passed by the politicians is well vetted for, for sound and reasonable and rational, consequences in terms of what will evolve. And that's not the case. People literally wake up in the morning and think, okay, that's a good idea. Let's create this, sanctuary city. And they sell it.
Right.
And it's and people might think, oh, if they're selling this, probably well vetted. This is a sound policy. No, it's not a sound policy. It's a nice title to a policy that can be very dangerous.
Sometimes they create a policy based on the flavor of what's occurring in other places. They need to get involved in it. They need to, this is an issue that we can show that we're ahead of, and they don't even do their homework on it.
And again, I think that there's a confusion between being humanitarian and self-preservation and doing the right thing, so to speak. It has to be defined. I mean, democracy is not for everybody, in the sense that there are always people who will have grievances, right? It's not only in totalitarian countries, supposedly everybody is happy with the policy of the government. There always will be people who say, this laws, these policies are against us. But put away and aside the noise that people are making and bring the science into this, bring the social science into this, and start showing the balance between, yes, we want to be humanitarian, we want to absorb people who are here for good causes, but at the same time, let's not expose ourselves to danger. And let's not diminish the accomplishments that we as a society achieved over the years to become this country that everybody wants to come to. Let's not destroy this. Let's not move back. And when you look in history through various empires, including the Roman Empire, there is this sense that there was always the sense that the Roman Empire disappeared because it couldn't learn from its own mistakes, and it couldn't really see the larger picture. To me, Sanctuary City is a very myopic view. Everybody accuses police officers of having the myopic view. Right. No, Sanctuary City is a myopic view. It's not vetted for who belongs where and who should be deported or removed when they violate the laws and the rules of the society that they want to be part of.
And they don't want to talk about it when it goes bad. They want to move away from it.
Of course, because if I'm going to put out some policy out there and pretty soon I see that there are consequences, do I have the courage and the gut and the intellectual integrity to say, I'm sorry, I made a mistake? Well, show me the politician who says this.
First thing a politician does when they get elected is they focus on getting reelected. And what they miss is that if they truly serve the people correctly, they'd be elected forever. People would love you. They'd keep you in there because you're doing the right thing for the people.
Listen, there's some research that shows that people like to be lied to if what they hear aligns with their beliefs and makes them happy. So even though there's research shows that people will vote for politicians who they know are lying to them as long as they're saying the things that they want to hear. Right. So we have to educate the larger population out there. With today's exposure to technology, with the ability to fact check by yourself, do some research before. Right. Do some research before you are voting for something, before you're endorsing something, before you screaming out that, it's a great idea, be a little bit more informed.
And be more involved. You had mentioned prior, to coming on about in Israel, 71% of the people voted.
Yes.
Whereas in the United States, we tend to just take that, benefit and do it when you feel like it.
Yeah.
And that's what you show the accountability to the elected officials. That's where you make the corrections of what they're doing that's wrong, and you hold them accountable. You vote them out. You vote the right people in. But you have to do is what you just explained. Do your homework, get involved, and you have to vote. That's important.
If there's anything to be said about us being in 21st century, it's literally everybody and anybody, regardless of where they are in the world, in the most remote places, you have access to information. So having access to information is the first step in educating yourself and making the informed decision. Sure. If you're just using your cell phone to put out selfies on Instagram, you're not very different from Stone Age individuals who are just voting for the physically strongest person. You have to vote for the smartest person. You have to vote for the person who really puts out policies out there that will benefit you rather than hurt you in the long run.
And they're sincere about it, that they want to do what's right.
Yeah, and again, I am the first one to say, sometimes you have the right intentions, you try to pass something, you try to create something, and it doesn't work. Right. Again, have the decency to say, I made a mistake, it doesn't work, let's correct.
Better than have tried than not try, and at least you can figure what works and doesn't work.
It's like the Ford Pinto case back then. They released this defective car, and then they know that it's defective, and then they get together and say, okay, well, we better pay off the victims than correct the defect on the car, and then you have, people killed. So we're in the same situation, and nobody has learned. Nothing has changed. You made a mistake, correct it. Don't ignore it. Don't think that, it will go away.
It would seem that would be the obvious to do, but I tend to think that's the most difficult, especially for leaders, because they have to accept that. They have to publicly accept it. They have to publicly say, this wasn't the right plan. It didn't work out the right way. I got to come up with a different plan.
I study leadership for decades. I write about leadership. That, to me, if somebody would ask me, what is the most important quality of a leader? And I would say to accept accountability for his or her errors. You made a mistake. You did something that was not well informed. It was well informed, but the consequences were unintended consequences. Have the courage, have the leadership to stand up and say, we need to change it, and explain why. Not because there is some sort of a pressure, but again, this time be more informed. Do something that is different.
Do what's right, but not always what's most popular.
No,
it's very difficult to tell people what they don't want to hear.
It's similar to the other concept of leadership, that very few leaders are willing to surround themselves with people who are smarter than they are, better educated, because they have this, that fear that they'll be put on the spot. You don't know enough. You don't know the right thing. There's nothing wrong with saying I don't know enough. I always say I don't know much about anything. I think I know a little bit about policing. Right? And this is after doing research in policing for over 30 years. There are people out there who, in the news media, the other day I heard one of the anchors on one of the major channels that I'm not going to mention saying, prisons' main goal, or the only goal, is rehabilitation. No, it's not. It's one of the goals of prison. Right. Incapacitation is about incapacitation. That person who committed that crime, first and foremost, is not going to commit it again.
Right.
Yes, it's deterrence, it's general deterrence, it's individual deterrence, yes. And again, rehabilitation is there as one of the factors. But he says this on the news, and I'm thinking, now you're misleading maybe thousands or hundreds or a million people who are listening to you saying this with a lot of confidence. You don't know what you're saying.
A lot of the news is opinion. It's not even the news.
But of course, when you hear it from a well-established network,
you
somebody who is, all dressed up, sitting in a tie and saying, prison's goal is to rehabilitate. We're not in Sweden. We are in the United States of America. We have different goals. Right. Rehabilitation is not goal number one, and everybody knows it, who is in law enforcement, who is in criminal justice. But for him to say this, it almost, boils my blood to say, why are you saying this? People are listening to you. You are misinforming a larger population.
No doubt. Do you think that every prisoner has the ability to be rehabilitated? And now,
absolutely not. Absolutely not. There are people who are career criminals. There are people who, for whatever reason, without going to Lombroso, who said, people are born to be criminals. No, not to that extreme, but going to Bekorea and saying, this is a choice. People make choices in life. It becomes a way of life. And they make this, very business-like decisions. Does it pay for me to commit a crime and then maybe go to prison? Or it's better for me to get a decent job, 9 to 5, and make a decent living. And people make these decisions. And many will claim, not everybody has this ability to make this decision, and some people cannot get a job. And I will say, you know what? Maybe in certain countries, I don't accept it in the United States of America. You want a job, you'll get a job. The question is how much money you will make. But still, you want a job, you'll get a job.
You got to be willing to work. You got to be willing to take what's there and work your way up.
You prefer to break to somebody's house. Right. You prefer to burglarize. You prefer to, jump somebody and take their $10 or kill somebody for a cell phone. That's not somebody who is going to be a good candidate for rehabilitation. It's a state of mind.
We always say that the prisoners, after they go to prison, it's kind of like going to criminal university, because they learn from each other other ways to commit crimes. How to do interviews with the police, how to break into apartments, and it becomes a place where they only force to their trade. I think that some people obviously can be rehabilitated, but it
depends on the type of crime.
Correct.
It depends on the type of crime. Right. If you consciously, because some things happen and people don't think about the possible consequences, but if you consciously take a gun and rob a bank, and kill a security guard, for example, which is the classic example of premeditated behavior.
Kind of like Kathy Boudin with the whole.
Yeah, I mean, you know that this is what's going to happen. Maybe you don't necessarily go with this state of mind of killing the security guard, but if you're taking a
But
gun,
it changes.
you're
Right.
taking a gun, you're taking these chances. This is something that it's very hard to rehabilitate. This way of thinking that you can deprive people of their lives because you want $100 or $100,000, doesn't matter, that you equate dollars with people's lives, that you have the right to do that.
I think there's a difference between the people who do what you just described and people who become a part of it where it goes wrong and sometimes they make a mistake. Maybe they, looking back, they don't want to be there, but it's up to them to make that change.
Yeah, but
But you have to be accountable to know that I got a gun,
Yeah.
it could get bad, and I'm part of this. So my choice is, do I stay or do I go?
To me, again, and I'm extreme as an academic in my thinking, I know, but to me, being a former police officer, seeing the victims, seeing the consequences of crimes for the families of the victims, you're involved in an armed robbery. I don't care if you're a getaway driver, looking at the weather, whether or not, you should do it in the morning or in the afternoon. You're part of a potentially violent little crime. And this is something that is not just an idea that was temporarily planted in your mind. If you have it
Oh, you planned it out, you thought this out.
if you
right.
have it in you to take somebody's life, potentially,
And you know the consequences of it. You know what's involved,
Yeah.
and I'll make reference back to the Rockland County Brinks on the
Yeah.
car robbery.
Yeah.
That's not something that we're just flipping a coin. What do you want to do?
Yeah.
That's thought out. We have multiple people. We have weapons.
Yeah.
2 police officers were killed. A security guard was killed. That's not
that's
the
not,
magic wand that got waved.
No, and granted, people who are in prison for various drug-related violations, I can see how you can rehabilitate them. Because again, whether they were using themselves or they try to, sell some drugs to support their habit,
Right.
that's a different story. But anything that, sexual predators, rapists, murderers,
Right.
what kind of rehabilitation
murder
are you
and
looking?
sex crimes are behavioral crimes. And I mean, there's
Behavioral.
different levels of what occurs, but a sex crime, for the most part, is a behavioral crime. I work special victims. I've seen a lot of different things, but that's in you. That's who you are.
And again, some of my colleagues who study sex crime, again, I don't study sex crime, will say, yes, you can rehabilitate them. And again, I say, social science is still a profession in which people come out with conclusions and findings that are on 2 opposite sides of the spectrum. Some people will say, yes, it can work, and some people will say, no, it cannot work. So I know that people will argue about this, but me personally, again, from looking at sexual predators during the times when I was on the job, for seeing the patterns of behavior, for listening to what they're saying, right? Why they do that. Maybe sometime in the future it can be cured. As far as I'm concerned right now, it's a huge risk to the society.
I don't think
risk
it
to
can
the
be cured. I think it's a behavioral crime. I think it's in you. From what I've seen, this is what you do. And the victims are traumatized forever.
Forever.
And someone has to speak up for the victims. No different than we're trying to speak up for the cops.
Of course.
And keep the, policies of these crazy elected officials from impacting what they do. Someone has to speak up for those victims.
And you mentioned speaking for the cops. You're a cop, you have a job, they tell you do this job, and next thing you know, no, ignore what you were told. You don't have to enforce these laws. You don't have to enforce this ordinance anymore. What kind of message you're sending to the cop? Yes, law is a living thing. It changes. Ordinance is a living thing.
But then
It
change the
changes.
law.
But it has to change
Right.
through an informed, research-based practices, and not because somebody.
But no one wants to sign a name to change it. And see, even what they did in New York State with the bail reform, they buried the law inside the budget, because this way they can say they voted for the budget and they snuck in bail reform. And even the governor came out and said, well, I didn't know it was in here. Ignorance is not an excuse when you hold a position like that. So as a result of bail reform that got slipped in, we've created more and more victims. We've had many, many hate crimes. We have had individuals doing multiple bank robberies. We've had homicides. We've had rapes. all because you didn't know it was in the law. Like, where's the accountability for you?
Again, I think that being a politician is bulletproof in terms of accountability, unless
I
you're in
agree.
some country, you know.
Unless they get caught in a sex scandal, stealing money, taking bribes, and the news media reads them a lot.
Yeah, that's fine, you
Right.
know, and I think that many people, and again, this is not necessarily, you know, something that I research, but it's my personal feeling. I think that many people become politicians because they can get away with murder. They can.
Probably some have.
Probably not.
Maki, I want to thank you. This has been great. It's been very informative, and we're going to be back talking about some of the issues facing police mental wellness, and I think you're going to find a lot of that interesting. So
Thank you for
thank you for
having me.
coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you.